Hey everyone, so today I'm going to go over how I created this realistic landscape. It'll be a step-by-step guide teaching you from beginning to end, all the way through Unreal Engine's workflow, as well as render and bringing it into DaVinci for final color grading. So let's get into it. So first things first, find images that you can reference that kind of show you the landscape you're trying to create. This is incredibly helpful because whenever you're trying to make it realistic, it's always good to obviously reference something that's real. So this can help when it comes to how to make the color look real, how to balance the image, where to place different static meshes and things like that. So I definitely suggest collecting a bunch of reference. For this one, I collected a bunch of different images on European planes. I kind of just went through Google Images and just had a bunch of different ones collected to kind of see like how the landscape got laid out, how the trees look like in the distance, how much foliage is present, things like that. Now, I definitely did have to take more artistic liberties going through this because I don't have the exact foliage that you would use in something like this. So there are definitely some changes that I take, but it still is very nice to reference it to kind of get an idea of how to create it. Perfect example would be something like this. You can see the lake here, and maybe you want the trees up close, but when you're looking at this, you can see that there's heavy foliage and space between, say, the lake and the trees. So it just, again, helps reference things to kind of get a good idea of what it's going to look like. Okay, so let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to do is go over to Epic Games Launcher and then go over to Library. And for this project, I'm going to be using 5.5.4, not 5.6, mainly because the Gaia plugin that I want to use is in 5.5.4. So with that, I'm just going to click Launch. Once this pops up, the next thing I'm going to do is go over to Games and click Third Person. Next, you can pick a folder you want this in. I'm going to pick this one right here and then select. And then for the project name, I'm going to name this PRL_2 for photorealistic landscape. And then it's the second one I'm creating. And then click Create. So now that Unreal Engine is open, the first thing we want to do is create a level. So I'm going to do Control Space, right click here, go over to Level, and I'm just going to name this photorealistic landscape _2. And instead of actually typing it all out, I just chose PRL. And then open it up. Okay, so when your level first opens up, the first thing you'll notice is it's pure black. So to change that, just go over to Window, go down to Environment like Mixer, and then just create all of these. Okay, so now that we have all the lighting set up, the next thing we need to do is set up the project correctly. So to do that, we really just want to enable certain plugins. But before we get into that, I want to jump into Gaia. So for this specific tutorial, I am using Gaia, a landscape program to create the landscape that I'm going to use in Unreal Engine. Now, Gaia has an actual plugin that you can use, but Unreal Engine itself has a way of bringing in any height maps into its actual program. So I'll go over that first workflow first, but after that, I'll be going over the Gaia workflow, which is what I use moving forward. So in this particular scenario, if you want to bring in a height map into Unreal Engine, not using the Gaia plugin, what you want to do is go over to selection mode, go over to landscape, and then inside landscape, you're going to go over to import from file, and then height map file. And in our case, my height map file is this thermal shape. So I click on that, click OK, fit to data if you wish, and then import. Now, I don't particularly like using this method because there tends to be certain mistakes. To make things easier, I can go over here and just get rid of the height fog. But basically what's happening here is the height map, the height that's coming in is not accurate to the one that I saw in Gaia, which is why I prefer using the Gaia workflow because it tends to be more accurate to what I anticipate. So for that, if you want to go by that workflow, you can delete this. And we want to go over to Gaia.com to download Gaia. So down in the description below, I have a link to Gaia that's going to take you to this page right here. From this page, you can go over here to the download page and download Gaia. Gaia is luckily a free software if you want it to remain free. I believe you can export up to 1K using the free download, and then beyond 1K is when it starts to get paid. Generally speaking, it's $99 lifetime, and I think it's an amazing software. So definitely would suggest you downloading it. But in this particular scenario, when you download it and open it up, let me click on it and you'll see, and open it up. Over here under Tools, you can then go down to Install Plugins and it'll say Gaia to Unreal. Once you click that, you can then install the Gaia to Unreal plugin. This will automatically show up on your page to then download it. So definitely suggest you download it. In my case, I already have one here. Actually, I think I have like 4 here from testing this out. So for right here, I'm gonna exit out. So download it to any folder you want. Once you download it, you can go over to your Unreal Engine folder. So in this sense, find that one. Mine is Unreal Engine 5.5, since that's the Unreal Engine version I'm using. Open that up, go to Engine, go down to Plugins, and then you want to basically copy what you just downloaded here. So now go over to your Downloads folder or wherever you downloaded it. Open Gaia to Unreal. Open or unzip the Gaia to Unreal 5.5 or whatever version you're using. Again, highly suggest 5.5 for this tutorial. Export that, and then you will see the Gaia Unreal tools. So what you want to do is copy this and then go over to plugins and paste it in this folder. Once that's done, let's go back over to Unreal Engine. Before you restart, I would suggest just going down and going to Edit. Sometimes it pops up, sometimes it doesn't. I've honestly had both. If it does pop up, this is what it's going to look like, which is Gaia to Unreal. If you can click it and start the restart process, I would suggest that, so you don't have to restart twice. And the other one you want to turn on is the Movie Render Queue. One last plugin here. Type in HDRI and enable HDR backdrop in your scene as well. Once you click on these, you're going to see a little Restart Now button down on the bottom right. Click that and open your project up. Okay, now that Unreal Engine has opened up, the next thing we need to do is download the actual texture files and height map that is going to help us create our landscape. So to do that, go in the description below and I'll have something labeled landscape textures. Go into that and download it. Once you do, you should see a folder that looks like this and has these 7 different items. The main one we want to focus on right now is going to be the thermal shaper. So I'm going to minimize this. Go over here to this little logo symbol. This is the Gaia logo and our plugin. So I'm going to click on that and then go over to Import Height Map. Once I click Import Height Map, I'm going to go over to Thermal Shaper and click Open. And then you can click Create Landscape. Okay, so now that we have the landscape in our scene, the next thing we can do is bring down a plane to kind of act as our water. So it's going to show us where the water line is and we can adjust it to kind of get exactly what we want. So I'm going to go over here to the box with the plus, click on that, and then go over to Shapes and go to Plane. Once I do that, I'm going to bring it just a little lower. You can actually see it change colors if you bring it below the landscape like that. So I'm going to give you right here, and then I'm going to go over to scale on the right. Make sure that it's locked so that way everything is adjusted uniformly. And then I'm just going to type in 2500, which is going to create a giant plane. Now what I want to do is kind of bring the plane over here to be our lake. So that is looking good to me, but it isn't fully encompassing our scene. So just to be safe for now, I'm going to increase it to 4,000 and see how that looks. That is looking pretty good. So now the next thing I'm going to do is go over here. Actually, go find a good spot with your camera. If you want, though, you can always bring in a camera beforehand. So I'm going to go over here to the box with the plus, bring in cinematic and bring in the camera. The other way you can do this is also by bringing in the mannequin first to kind of look around different areas and have a size reference for you. But for now, I'm going to click on the camera, pilot it, turn it around to the scene that I am looking for, and then I can switch this over to DSLR, and then I'm going to increase the current aperture up to 22. Since it's a landscape scene, you want a high aperture count. So now I'm going to move around and try and find kind of a good spot. And then from here, I can exit out, pin the camera scene right here, If you ever lose your camera, by the way, you can double click on it. I know the landscape is kind of massive, so double clicking on it will bring you straight towards the object you clicked on. But once that's done, I'm going to do Control Space, type in MANN to bring in our mannequin, and drag and drop our mannequin in. So now that our mannequin is in our scene, we can kind of move it around so we can get a frame of reference close to the camera to get an idea of how massive our landscape really is. There we go. We now have a good scene set up to get started on. And then we can start working on grabbing all the static meshes we're going to use in our scene. So to do that, I'm going to go over to Window and go over to Fab. Okay, so now that Fab is opened up, I'm going to go over to the search bar and just type in Quixel. And I'm going to download a few assets that I used in my scene. So the first one is going to be the European hornbeam, European black alder, curbside weeds. I use the foliage spruce trees. However, you can definitely try and use different other trees. I kind of like the way these looked in my scene. Wild grass, grass, and more grass. And the last piece of grass, I swear. And then I use the uncut grass material, which I'm going to use for our actual landscape, as well as this mossy sandy ground. And then finally, I also downloaded this rock pack. Now, the last thing you need to download for this is going to be a water material that you use for the lake. Now, I have a link below that will take you to the water material that I use. It's paid. It's only $1. It just helps support me. But if you want to use something else that's free, there's a bunch of different options you can go for. I would even suggest maybe even creating your own, since I think to kind of pull off the general kind of glass look that I have in the scene, you can do so with a very simple material. So up to you how you want to proceed, but I will be showing how I use my material in this tutorial. Okay, so now that we've downloaded all of our assets, next thing we can do is start creating our landscape material. So I'm going to do Control Space, right click, go over to Material, and then I'm going to name this M_landscape. And then I'm actually going to create a landscape folder as well, name this landscape. And then I'm going to drag my material into that folder, move here. And then I'm going to open up this landscape folder, go back to our original landscape textures right here, and drag and drop them into our scene. I think the drag and drop literally dropped it into, there we go. And this tree dead zone, the black and white one, into our scene as well. Okay. That can be deleted. And then now I can go over Control Space, open up our landscape material. And with the landscape open up, I'm going to do Control Space and now drag and drop those two textures in. The next thing I want to drag and drop into our scene is going to be the roughness and normal of another one. So I'm going to go over to Fab, and inside Fab, I'm going to click Megascans, Surfaces, and go to the uncut grass that we downloaded. And once I click on that, I'm going to bring in the normal, and then I'm going to bring in the roughness and line all of these up. Okay, next I'm going to go over here and right click and type in base color. I'm looking for this QMF base color adjustments. And I'm going to copy and paste so we have two. I'm going to do V click to get a vector node. And I'll name this Beto _color _1. And then we can again control and click, and I'll name this one Albedo color 2. And then we can do S click to get a parameter node and just name it saturation _2. S click brightness underscore 2. Bring these back and then S-click again. Nope, not an S-click. And I'll name this contrast underscore number 2. And then we can copy all of these and paste up here as well. And we want to change the name. So I'm going to get some space and then just change all these over to 1. Now, what this is going to do for us is it's going to allow us to split out the base color and have us actually be able to adjust the saturation levels, the brightness levels, and the contrast levels independently of each other, which is going to be very helpful later down the line. And then just attach all of these in. And if you want, you can always start all these with the base value of 1 all the way across. And then I will have this color be slightly green, and then this color be slightly yellow. And again, these can all be changed down the road. In fact, you can right click and, oh, it's already parametered up. Never mind. Okay, cool. I'll just organize this real quick. Next thing we can do is get a landscape layer. So let me do landscape layer coordinate, which is going to be this right here. And I can plug this into both of our landscape textures. Now, for anyone who doesn't understand what I'm doing next, it is to map the actual scale of the texture. The texture and the landscape are all at 4033 pixels. So what you want to do right here is just type in 4033. Okay, so now that that is done, let's do a lerp node. And for this lerp node, we are going to bring in these two to A and B. This will be into alpha, and then the lerp will go into base color eventually. Okay, next thing is I want a static switch so I can turn this on when I want it and when I don't. So I'm going to type in static. It's not typing. Static switch parameter is what we want. That way we can turn it on and off when needed. I can put this into base color. This bottom one will be false, and this top one through the lerp can be true. But first, I'm actually going to do a multiply node as well, and then do a parameter node. Do this albedo underscore int for intensity. Spelled that all wrong. Albedo underscore int for intensity. Bring that into the multiply node, and then the multiply node will go into the static switch parameter, and now we are set. Now, if anyone doesn't understand why we set up a static switch for this one right here, this texture, I understand you can't see now if I click on it. This texture right here is basically something that Gaia kicks out, telling you where trees are and where trees aren't. So all these black spots are where trees are going to spawn on the map. It really isn't a rule as much as it's a guide. It kind of helps you understand like where you can put trees, where you can't. Obviously, you can adjust your scene however you want, but it's nice to start off that way to kind of get a quick look at how the landscape could be, and then create from there. And then the last two are our roughness and our normal. So to start off, this is an ORM. That stands for ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic. And that goes in the order of RGB, which means our roughness, being the middle, is G. So I am going to drag you over into a multiply node. And then I'm going to click right here and call this roughness intensity. I'll just do int for intensity again. Bring it in, and this can go into roughness, and then this value can be 1. The next one we can use here is actually doing another S-click and doing specular. And just adding specular in there just so we have a parameter that we can adjust if we need it. And then this last bit is the normal. For both of these, we need to do a texture coordinate. Texture coordinate is going to help us set up our tiling. So I can go over here and then I can copy and paste this and do a multiply node and then an S node. I'll call this normal underscore tiling. Bring you into the multiply and bring you in. So the texture node is going to basically look at the coordinates of the actual landscape itself, and the tiling means I can adjust the texture node. That way I can adjust the overall tiling of the normal map, which is going to be very helpful. If you want to be nitpicky, you can kind of use the roughness to adjust as well. So just in this scenario, I will do a S click and just call this roughness underscore tiling. Do a multiply node, and we can kind of put both of these in. The normal mode, or not the normal mode, but the normal tiling will really affect your scene. The roughness really won't, but I kind of like them lining up. So really whatever I end up putting as my normal tiling, I'll make my roughness tiling. And then again, make it 1. If I didn't add 1 to any of these parameters, you always can later on. In this case, I'll do 0.1. Is it number lock? There we go. 0.1, enter, and then 1 for intensity. There we go. Make sure there's a value in all of these because your material will come out basically not working if you don't. Okay, now to finish us off, I am going to do a flatten normal. And then I'm going to do a 1 minus to get the opposite. If my thing wants to type. My patience. There we go. And then S click for normal underscore int. And then I'm going to click 1. Nope. I'm going to click 1 here. Go over to 1 minus. Go over to flatness. Bring my texture sample into the normal. And then the result can go into normal. And now we have created our landscape material. So I'm going to go over to apply, close, and then open it back up, right click and do create material instance. And then once I have create material instance, I can now click on my landscape, or sorry, click on the instance, click on the landscape, go down to landscape material and click our little arrow. And if you did that in the right order, your landscape material will pop in. Okay, and here is our landscape material. Now what's going on here is the static switch is starting off. So what's happening is it's showing the difference between where trees are and where trees aren't. Gaia exports this as part of a texture that you can use to kind of tell where trees are supposed to be planted on your landscape, which helps a lot when it comes to the foliage process. So if you want this to be turned off, you can actually click on your landscape, go over here to landscape instance, and you'll see parameter right here. Click on that and click here, and it'll switch back to the other landscape material that we created. So I'm actually going to keep this clicked for now because what I want to do is start painting in our foliage into our scene. But the first thing I do notice, which is our lake right now, is blending really well into our scene. So just to be able to differentiate between the two, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in our landscape material to our plane. So to do that, I'm just going to do Control Space, go over to Water Materials, and then I'm going to click the water instance and just drag and drop that onto our scene, which is going to add the water in. So the next thing you need to do is go up here to selection mode and switch this over to foliage. Now that you switch it over to foliage, you can do Control Space and head over to European Hornbeam, which is going to be the first layer of trees we're going to put down. So for that, I'm going to open up European Hornbeam, click on Static Mesh to filter for only static meshes, and drag these first 4 trees in. Before you kind of get started, the one thing I do want to suggest always checking on any of the stuff that you paint down is shift click, kind of click everything, right click on it, and then make sure that nanite is enabled for everything. This is going to be very intensive on your system, so you want to make sure you give it any plus you can. So for any kind of static mesh you bring in, make sure nanite is selected. But now that I have my trees, the first thing I can do is just paint to kind of get a general idea of where we're at. So that is our first paint, and you can tell it is a ton of trees to the point where I think I just made more of a giant bush. So to erase, you can do shift click and erase. And then I'm going to click on the individual trees, shift click to have them all selected. And then down here, you're going to see density. So you have paint density up top, which does affect the density, but you also have painting density in the actual static mesh itself. This one will also greatly affect it. And what we want to do is bring both down. So I'm actually going to bring this all the way down to 0.1 for the paint density, and then 1 for the density for the static meshes. And let's see what that comes out to be, which is much more manageable. So for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint a line right here of where our trees are and kind of have that established. And then I can go around the lake, paint these in as well. Okay. So now that everything has been painted on, the next thing I'm going to do is go back to my camera, pilot it so I can see everything. And then the next thing I want to do is actually switch it over to Path Tracer. So Path Tracer is another way of rendering your scene. So most people who are using Unreal Engine are using Lumen, which is the real-time renderer, and it's beautiful. But when you want really realistic results, you got to use Path Tracer because what it does is it'll do realistic reflections as well as correct light bounces, or more correct light bounces. So it's a good way of rendering more realistic scenes out of Unreal Engine. Okay, so now I have my trees painted down and I've checked it via Path Tracer. The next thing I can do is finally switch off this static switch so I can get a better look at our landscape and start kind of really adding in the details. So for that, I'm just going to click on the landscape again, go over here to the landscape material, click on that, and click this parameter to switch it to the other landscape. I can click save now. And the next thing I'm going to want to do is to start painting down some grass foliage to get an idea of just the frontal look of the scene. Before I do that, though, I do want to use different materials in this scenario, or rather different surfaces in this scenario, to kind of differentiate or split between the background and the foreground, since we're going to need two different forms of realistic ground. So for that, what I'm going to do is switch over to landscape and click on select. And I'm just going to select all the landscape pieces that pop up in our scene close to the camera. So I can switch out I'll just click these even though they don't pop on, just to make it all even. So once you do that, you can actually go over here on the right-hand side where it says override material, and then you can pick any material to override with. In my case, I'm going to do a mossy sandy ground that we downloaded. So I'm going to go over to Fab, hit surfaces, go over to mossy sandy ground, high, and this is the instance that I want to use, which is VI underscore, or MI underscore VEI. So click on that. You can click right here to get it attached, or you can search it up by doing MIVEI. The click will only work if it's the last thing you clicked in the content browser. So now that I've done that, I can now click out and adjust our actual landscape material. So right now, if we get close, you just want to make sure that there's no grid appearing. So if I double click on this, you can see that my tiling is set at 0.2. Your tiling's probably coming in at 1, which you can see, well, nope again, which you can see has probably a little more repetition since the tiling is smaller and more easily shown. So I suggest clicking tiling under global parameters and switching this to 0.2 to kind of spread out the look of the tile so it's not as noticeable. So now that that is done, I can go back over to the foliage mode, do Control Space to bring up the content browser, and go grab our actual foliage for the ground, so our grass. So I'm going to go down and click on these, shift click all, and drag them into foliage. Once I do that, I can click on the trees, unselect them, re-click on the grass, select them, and I will just paint. Now, once I just paint one thing, you can see that they are really spread out and it is not anywhere close to the ground coverage that we want. So now I can erase all of it. And now that I have a better idea of how little it's going to paint, I'm going to bring this down to about 900, bring the paint density all the way up, and then I'm going to actually click here and change the paint density for my grass to 500 and click paint. And now that is looking much better. So now that the ground coverage is looking good, the only other thing I am noticing though is the grass itself looks a little small for our scene and we might want to increase the overall scale. So for this, I'm going to do 1.2 and 1.5, and I can delete everything, paint it again, and that is looking much more accurate to how I would like the grass to be. So now that that is done, I can delete all that and make sure we're just grabbing the parts of this that we want in our scene and painting it on. So now that our grass is painted on, we can go back to the selection mode, click on our camera, and again, I'm going to switch over to Path Tracer to get a better idea of how it's all looking. Now, the second I switch to Path Tracer, you're going to see a very perfect line where all foliage is pretty much cold. So what you want to do is actually use a command to kind of get around this. So if you check the description below, I do have it written below, but that command will be r.raytracing.geometry.instantstaticmeshes.:0 and then click enter. Now you won't see anything happen yet, but if you just move the camera just slightly, it will then populate everything and it is all now in. So now that our foliage is in our scene, the next thing we can do is start adding in some more trees to kind of fill out how we want this to look. Now, by checking out my reference, I can see that a lot of the foliage doesn't really show any branches or trunks. It's all very thick all the way around, and you don't really see any opening into the forest. It all just looks kind of bushy. So what we're going to try and do is emulate that for all of the foliage and trees in our scene so the forests look very compact. So now that we just checked out the reference, we can see that ours very clearly shows the trunks and doesn't really have a bushiness to the overall forest. So what we need to do is adjust that. So I am now going to go back over to the foliage mode. And while working on the trees, I can kind of go in front, or actually I'll do Control Space, go to black alder, and I'll start adding in our foliage types. So we have black alder, and then I can go over to foliage sets to grab the other bit of foliage. I can unclick all of the grass here, click on our first piece, actually make sure this is unclicked as well. Click on these, and these are the ones I'm going to be using to be a little more bushy and kind of fill up the bottom half of our scene when it comes to the forest. So I'm going to change you to maybe 0.25, 0.15, maybe 0.65. So there's a large variation. Again, it's painting way too many. So we can adjust that and maybe bring the intensity down to 1 and start painting this into kind of the front half of our forest. And now that that is done, you can switch back to selection, right click, pilot camera, and switch this over to path tracing. And that is what our scene is looking like. So now we can start making adjustments to the actual front foliage to add some grittiness and character so it doesn't feel like just a carpet of grass. And then we can then adjust our landscape to match the color so it looks a little better. So I'm going to switch this back to lit. I'm going to go over to foliage, and now let me get a little more space on this side. Open up the content browser, go over to Fab, have the static meshes pop up, and start bringing in some more foliage into our scene that can add a little more differing look when needed. So the first thing we want to do is unclick the spruce, make sure none of the trees are selected. And then we can unclick pretty much most of the foliage we brought in as well. And let's just keep the kind of wheatgrass. And I will paint the wheatgrass in and kind of see what happens. Okay, so now that that is done, I'm going to go back to the camera pilot, and then we can switch over to unlit, or sorry, switch over to path tracer, and again, get a little better idea of how it's looking. So we got a little bit of a dirt patch right there that we need to fill up on the far right. I'm liking the overall kind of push. I think a lot of this can be cleaned up, and then from there, we're probably good to go. So I'm just going to do some quick cleanup to get this to a really good place, and then we'll switch over to adjusting the landscape. Okay, so now that the foliage is done, the next thing I want to do is start adjusting the overall color throughout the entire scene. And what I mean by that is we can actually adjust the color of the foliage, the color of the trees, and the color of the landscape to all kind of be close in match in when it comes to brightness and saturation. So it looks like we're looking at one full unified scene. So to do that, I'm actually going to switch over to unlit, and I'm going to control spacing of the content browser, go down to any of the pieces of foliage that I know I'm using, in this case, the grass. I'm going to click on the grass, and I'm going to go over to base color controls, and I'm going to decrease the brightness a little bit. And then we can switch back to lit and unlit to kind of get a brightness level that we are looking for. And I can do this for all my assets to make sure that they are in line with each other. Now that that is done, the next thing we do is actually click on our landscape, since that is going to be the greatest change of all. And I'm going to do scroll down on the right hand side, click on the landscape. Again, we want to switch to unlit. And this is going to be a constant process, so just play around with it as much as you can. But what we're trying to align this to is these front two colors with this back color. So I'm going to click all of these on, so I have adjustment over all of them, and I will start playing with them. So I know off the bat that the brightness is way too high for both. So I can kind of do 0.5 across the board. And then albedo intensity, probably too much. We can then start adjusting the color. Right there. And then we can go to path tracer to get a better idea. The next thing we can do to kind of make sure that it is looking a little more accurate is we can also increase the normal. So the normal is what is going to allow us to kind of add texture to the scene without really having to paint foliage throughout our entire scene. So to do that is increasing the normal. So the normal, again, is the same tiling you saw with the material, but the normal is what is going to cause a bit of texture when it comes to darkness and lightness and some kind of contrast, so it looks as if there are foliage in the background. So to do that, I'm just going to take the tiling and move it down to 0.005. And now you can see how it has some texture to it. And we're going to want to kind of emulate that. Now I'm going to say up front, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to paint this with foliage as well as these corners right here. But everything back here is what I'm going to want to be just this base material. So now that we have most of our foliage in our scene, our landscape is a little more adjusted. What we're going to want to do is put it under our actual finished light so we can then make all our final adjustments and really finish out the scene. So to do that, we're going to want to bring in an HDRI. Now I am using 2gacademy.net for all of my HDRIs. I particularly like them because if you actually click over here at HDRI and click on any of these HDRIs, they are absolutely landless. They're sky only, which is really interesting because a lot of times when you're looking for HDRIs, they'll have a actual landscape in the background, which kind of competes with what you're trying to create. So by using this, you kind of avoid that. So kind of backing up here, the one I'm going to be using for my scene is this right here, HDRI Sky STCL004. So if you want to use this one, feel free to download it. Now back here in Unreal, the next thing I'm going to do is go over here to the box of the plus and hit the place actors panel. I'm actually going to get out of the camera just to avoid kind of moving it again. And I'm going to type up here HDRI and click on HDRI backdrop and just drag it into our scene. Now, when you see this horrible background, that's how you know the HDRI is added in. So what I'm going to do is just switch back to selection mode, make sure place actors menu is gone, and I'm just going to move this, click on the HDRI. I'm going to move the HDRI below our landscape, which is quite important. And then you can also go here to the right where it says size. Once you click on HDRI, I'm going to increase this to 5,000. And then again, bring this down. I wonder why it's being a little stubborn here. Let's see. There we go. Can move you all the way back, which is going to work for our scene. And then now that that is done, the next thing you need to do is just drag and drop your HDRI that you downloaded into Unreal. So find the folder where that is held. Once you find the folder where it's held, all you have to do is click Control Space on your content browser. You can unfilter for anything. And then all you're going to need to do is just drag and drop it into your content browser. By doing so, you're going to see this pop up, which is the texture cube. Now, when we switch back over to the HDRI backdrop, we can click on this, go over to the cube map and click on the one that you just imported because it'll be right there. And now you have everything in your scene. So I can adjust this a little bit to kind of get the background that I am looking for. And now the next thing that we can do is actually add in a post-process volume to help us kind of finish off the look of our scene and add any final adjustments at the very end before render. So to do that, I'm going to click on the box with the plus, go down to volumes and add in a post-process volume. Once you click on the post-process volume, this is what you're going to see. On the right here, you have all the different things the post-process volume will adjust. But the first one you want to do is type in the search bar bound and click infinite extent unbound, which is basically going to mean that everything outside of the volume is now going to be adjusted by the volume, not everything inside the volume. So now that that is done, I can click out and then type in EXP, because the first thing we want to do is level out the exposure so it doesn't change between our scene. I'm going to click 0 and 0 to start off, and then we can always adjust from there. This is actually looking pretty good on that end. So once that is all done, we can actually switch over to Path Tracer to adjust the settings there so we can kind of see everything more clearly. So I'm going to click Path Tracer, max bounces, sample per pixel, emissive material, reference depth of field, reference atmosphere, and reference denoiser. Now there's a few things we want to change here. The max bounces 32 is a little too much. We can just switch that down to 16. And samples per pixel, we can make this 200. And then max path intensity, we can keep it 24. Emissive materials we can actually turn off and then click on reference depth of field. And then reference atmosphere can be turned on and reference denoiser can be turned off. And now if we switch over to Path Tracer to get the full idea of what we're looking for, I can now be piloting, and this is closer to how our export is going to look, which is exactly what we want. But the last thing I do want to note is right now our sun is over here, but you can see that the shade and everything does not look accurate to where the sun is. So what we want to do is actually switch on lighting. I'm going to move my HDR backdrop in lighting as well as my post-process volume. And then I'm going to click on the actual directional light. I can click off the rotation. So this right here is a snapping grid, which means every time you rotate, it'll rotate by 10 degrees. In our case, we want full control and not necessarily exactness. So we can unclick this to be able to take it off grid. And I'm going to adjust it closer to where that sun position is. And now it looks like it's right here. So I'm going to adjust it a little. So now our sun is right there, which now is going to help us a lot because since this is a little more faded out, we don't necessarily need to paint this with foliage since it's not going to be in the sun, but say over here on the right, that will be in our sunlight. So that's probably a place where we want to give a little more extra attention when it comes to fully designing out our scene. So now that our lighting is much better, I can actually click on our mannequin to delete the mannequin to get a better look at how our scene is coming about and make all final adjustments. Okay, so now that I have the foliage at a place where I am happy, the next thing I'm going to do is start adjusting our water material so it looks a little more realistic for the scene. So to do that, I am going to click on our plane, and click on our water material. And the main thing I want to adjust here is really just the tiling, since I think it's right on the kind of border that I set up for it. So we just want to go and click on the tiling. I'm going to start this off at 0, and then we can slowly increase it from there to see if we can add any kind of more watery effects. So 5,000 is where it goes too much. Let's try 1,000, which looks a little too watery. It looks a little too repetitive. If you kind of look at the shadows right here, I'm going to maybe do 600, and I'll keep it there for now and click save. Okay, so now the other thing I want to note is now that we've added foliage to this little embankment right here, it's added a really good color reference for the background landscape. So now what I'm going to try and do is adjust this landscape to kind of have the same color as this landscape up front, since they're kind of close in the same direction. And the more they match, the more this will kind of sell the effect. So I'm going to switch over to unlit and kind of look at the difference here and see if I can adjust it. So I'm going to go over to the landscape and again, just start playing around with the exact same parameters I mentioned before to really key everything in. Okay, now as I'm adjusting this, the one thing I am noticing is the background color is actually matching really well with the light of the foreground. However, you can tell that the shaded areas are not matching as well as we would like. So to kind of adjust that, we can adjust this the same way we did with the front landscape by adding in some new blocks and changing the landscape there. So I'm going to actually close this down, do shift click to open up our content browser, go find our landscape material, and I'm going to right click off of this and create a material instance. And at the very end, I'm just going to do shadow underscore instance. And now I can go over to landscape, click select, and select the pieces of our landscape that we want to override. And we can go over to the override right here, click on this, type in m underscore landscape, and just click on the shadow material. And now when I click out and click over to path tracer, switch over to selection mode. Now it is all white, but we can then key that in so it looks a little more appropriate. So I'm going to click on camera to pilot it. We can now see where all that landscape is existing. And then we can open up this so we can get a nice head start. So I'll take the color and we can add it to the other one. So if I do shift space, open up the other version, I can have them both next to each other, and I'll just copy some of the data over. So I'm already pretty much there, and then we can make the adjustments from there. And now that it is looking similar, I can go back in and just make it a little more accurate to the color in the shade. So to do that, I can decrease the brightness by a good amount, which I think actually might have just done the trick right there. And maybe I can just adjust this to be also darker. Click OK, exit out. And now our landscape in the shade and our landscape not in the shade are matching much, much better. Okay, so now that our scene is pretty much complete, the next thing we can do is go into the camera sequencer to kind of set up the entire shot, make any final adjustments, and then go for render. So to set up our camera sequencer, what we need to do is go over here to clapperboard, click on that and go to add level sequence. From here, you can name it. I'll do ls underscore main. Oh my. ls underscore main underscore 2 and click save. Now that that's done, you'll have the sequencer pop up right below. And the first thing you want to do is actually go over to the add, go over to actor to sequencer and click on Cine Camera Actor. And your Cine Camera Actor will pop in. Now, the next thing you can do is actually switch this over to unlit or lit. It really doesn't matter. You're just trying to get an idea of your scene so you can move the camera. So I'll actually stay out in lit and I will lock in its current position. And then I will go forward and switch the position. So now I can do right click and then scroll down and you'll see on the top right here that the camera speed is changing. If you're not sure what's going on, I'm talking about this right here. Camera is at 0.33. If I right click and scroll up, it goes up. If I scroll down, it goes down, which is really just changing the camera movement. So in scenes like this, you can then easily adjust it. So I'm going to zoom in. I guess I'll go, oh, that shows too much. Okay, let's see this. And then I'm gonna opposite these. So you can just drag the keyframe across whenever you want to switch them. So now it's going to end where we've kind of set our shot. This is going to be the beginning. So it's just going to slowly kind of pull back as we angle up to show everything. So now I'm going to zoom out and I can go over here to these numbers. If I want, add 500, just get some more space, drag this all the way out. I'm going to go for a maybe 260 edit. Let's see, 270 sounds good to me. Pull all the way back and then click play. And I think that looks really good. Okay, so now that that is keyed in, the next thing we can do is start adding in some camera shake. So I'm gonna do Control Space, go over to the content browser. I already have camera shake made right here, but I will adjust it and show you kind of how I made it. So I'm gonna right click, go over to Blueprint Class. In all classes, I'm gonna type in camera and then go down to camera shake base and click on that and open it. Once that's opened, I'm gonna do rename it to camera underscore shake. And then open it up. When you open it up, the menu that you want is really on the right. You don't really need the event graph. So you can either close down the event graph or just make life easier, close it and open it up again. And it won't show the graph, sorry. It won't show the graph. So now that that is opened up, the next thing we can do is change the root shake pattern. So I'm gonna switch this over to Perlin noise, which is gonna add a nice kind of pattern for the shake to move by. After that, we can switch over down to timing and change the duration over to 0. If it's at 1, it'll only last 1 second. If it's at 0, you can switch it to be infinite or really just change the timing however you want. From there, I'm going to go over to location, rotation, and FOV. And the idea here is I want some small bumps that are happening a medium amount of the time. Amplitude is kind of how drastic the up and down is going to be. The frequency is how often that occurs. So I want a high frequency and a low amplitude to kind of get the effect that I'm going for. So I am probably going to go by 0.25 and 0.25 and work from there. To kind of skip forward to the one that I already created, this one over here, what I'm using is 0.15, 0.55, 0.25 and 0.65 if you want the exact same effect. I do not dive into the X, Y, and Z, but if you want to kind of adjust parameters a little more specifically, you can always dive deeper into the X, Y, and Z, pitch, yaw, and roll as well. So kind of closing that, to add the camera shake into your scene, you can go over to where it says Cine Camera Actor, go over to the plus sign, go over to Camera Shake, and then I'm going to click on my shake. It'll come in as this yellow bar right here, and then just adjust it for the full length of your scene. So now if I click play, it's slowly backing up and kind of nicely animating our scene. Okay, so now that our scene is pretty much done and the camera sequencer is set up, this is the moment where we can go through and make any final adjustments. It's good to do it at this point because you now know the exact route of your camera, so you know what is going to be in scene, what isn't going to be in scene, and you can make all those nice fine-tuned adjustments. So I'm going to go through that now. I won't be doing kind of a step-by-step at this point, but I will be showing you everything I do just kind of sped up. So if you want to pause and play to kind of see any final adjustments I make, feel free to do so. All right, so now that all my final touches are done, the next thing we can do is jump into the actual render before we shoot it over to DaVinci. So to render your scene, you can go over here to this little clapper box right here and click on Unsaved Config. Once you click on Unsaved Config, you can actually get rid of deferred rendering and open up settings. In settings, you can do anti-aliasing, you can do .exr. I'm going to do path tracer for our renderer, and then console variables, just to add in that console variable to make sure everything ends up okay, because a few times when I exported, some weird articles kind of made it in. So .exr is kind of like a good bit depth at 16 bits for an export from Unreal. If you want to kind of be checking it out or you want a lighter export, you can always do JPEG. After that is Path Tracer, which is our renderer. Nothing really to do here, just marking the fact that Path Tracer exists. Then you can jump into anti-aliasing and console variables. Anti-aliasing is possibly the most important because it is what is going to push this through a bunch of different passes to make sure it looks real and isn't kind of missing any information. So for this, I usually try and do about maybe 400 passes for something like this. So you can do maybe 20. I'm actually going to do 30 and 10, which is going to amount to about 300. And then you can click override anti-aliasing. Next is console variables, where again, you can click this plus sign, paste in the variable that I had mentioned earlier. This is in the description below. It's just going to make sure that everything comes out normal, and then just put it down to 0 and click accept. Actually, sorry, open back up. And then the last one here is the output. You can pick the output directory in which you want this outputted. I will choose mine. And then you can choose the output resolution. For something as large as this, I definitely suggest doing HD. Anything higher could crash your system. And then click accept. My one final warning before you click render here is to make sure that you saved your project. This scene is very dense and it has definitely caused my computer to crash. So just to be on the side of caution, definitely make sure to save. And now that it's saved, you can go over here to the clapperboard again and go over to render local. Okay, and now on to the last leg. So this is DaVinci Resolve. This program is completely free. You can download it and use a, I guess, minimal version of the paid version. However, it's still a completely powerful program, and I would suggest it to anyone who's trying to learn how to edit. So when you're inside DaVinci Resolve, the first thing you can do is go over here to the left and click on the media pool. So in here, this is where we're going to drag in our render into DaVinci Resolve. So find where your render is being held by going through the folders up on the top left. Once you do that, you're going to see this right here, which is .exr and .jpeg. Now, if you ever look at your render file, it's going to be a bunch of individual photos. In this scenario, what's happening is DaVinci knows it's a bunch of photos that are in sequence and is compiling it already in video format for you, which is incredibly helpful. So in my case, I'm going to bring in the .exr into our scene. And then from there, I can switch over to this tab right here, which is our edit tab. And I'm going to drag our clip, which is up in the top left, into our playhead. Now, immediately you're going to see the color is horrible. So do not worry. What's happening is it's reading the codec incorrectly. So we just need to let DaVinci Resolve know how to read the color information from our render. So to do that, I'm going to go over to File, go down to Project Settings, hit Color Management, and then go down to Input Lookup Table. Click on that drop-down menu, scroll to the very bottom, and at the very bottom, you're going to see Linear to sRGB. Click that, click Save, and the color is going to look much better. Now, this is not going to be much of an editing tutorial, so right from here, I'm just going to switch us over to the Color tab to teach you really how to color it, since that is what is playing into the realism. So we can switch over here to the Color tab, and inside the Color tab, you are going to see a bunch of different options available. The main one you need to notice is the node-based system, which is right here. So for the first node, what we're going to do is just right-click and go over to Node Label and just type in Exposure. And this is going to be the node that we adjust any exposure or general lighting. So that can be temp, tint, lift, gamma, gain, offset, or any of these down here. So I'm just going to adjust these slightly just to get the right tone you're looking for. This is all personal preference. Feel free to adjust your scene however you see fit to generate the look you're going for. Okay, so now that you have adjusted all of those parameters, the next thing you can do is do Alt-S to add in another node. Once you click Alt-S, I'm going to right-click here, node label, and call this Hue v Hue. And this node is really just to adjust the colors that arise in your scene by using this tab right here, which is Hue versus Hue. Now what you can do here is click on this line, and you can then adjust the color based on the hue that you're clicking on. So I'm clicking on red to orange, so everything that's red to orange is now drastically changing colors. Now the idea here is obviously not to destroy your scene, but to just gently adjust the colors in any direction based on how you want your scene to look. So in this case, I can make it look more auburn, or I can make it look more green. This is also a good way to kind of unify the colors in your scene as well. I kind of want it to be a little goldeny, so that looks really good. And then I can also click on here to get the green just generally higher. Again, you can see the color change here. So just introducing a slight blue. And then the last bit, if you want the blues to change, you can adjust those as well. And again, you can make it a little different. I want more of a blue. Okay, so now that that is done, the next thing I can do is Alt-S again to get another node, and this node will be called Hue v Sat for hue versus saturation, which is going to be this one right here. And it works the exact same way. You can just click and change the saturation throughout. I want the blue sky to really pop, so I'm going to adjust that. And then you can adjust the general saturation throughout. I kind of like the green being green. And again, it just lets you have a little more control over the parameters in your scene. And this is looking really good. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add in 3 more nodes that kind of rough up your scene. So the idea behind this is when you render from an animation suite, it's going to come out pristine, and it's not going to look like it has any imperfections that a DSLR camera would have. So what you want to do is kind of reintroduce those imperfections to make it look more realistic. And the three effects I'm talking about that can do this within DaVinci Resolve are chromatic aberration, glow, and film grain. So I'm going to add those three in right now by doing Alt-S 3 times. And then I'll name this first one chromatic aberration. So node label. I'll just name this CA. This next one can be grain. And then we can finish off with glow. Actually, we might want to switch this will be glow. This will be grain, just to make sure there's no coloring issues. Okay, so for chromatic aberration, you can just go up here into the search bar and type in CHR, and you'll see chromatic aberration removal. You want to add that in. Then you can zoom in anywhere into your scene just to get a good look of the edge, which is where most chromatic aberration kind of shows up in DSLRs. So I'm just going to adjust that. Again, the idea isn't to do a ton, just a slight amount to kind of add in the chromatic aberration. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is actually go over to glow. So I'm going to exit out and now type in glow in our effects, add in glow. Now, the other thing I want to note is glow is definitely on the paid version. I'm not sure about the other two effects I'm using right now. However, I do know glow is. It is something I definitely suggest kind of being able to use in the future. If you're on the free version, I don't think it's worth paying for this just one effect, but definitely keep it in mind if you ever do switch over to DaVinci's paid version. So now clicking on glow, I can adjust the spread, which is kind of adding like an interesting hot spot to our scene. And then you can also adjust the shine threshold to get it to hit just the right spot. That way it kind of adds a little glow in the background and again emulates the look of a DSLR. Now the next one is grain. So I'm going to exit out and now type in grain. For this effect, less is definitely more. So I'm just going to reduce the opacity as much as I can and kind of get an idea of how the texture looks and adjust it from there. So we can adjust the grain size. You want it to be natural, so you can see all the fuzz right here. You can kind of hang out that kind of grain size to match it. And then I can reduce the opacity. Maybe I'll do 0.22, and that is looking really good to me. Now, the last thing we need to do to kind of render out our full scene is go over here to this little rocket. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to bring us over to the Export tab. Now, on the left-hand side, you don't really need to change any of these. The parameters come in pretty much set at the highest quality, so I wouldn't change any of that. However, up at the top left, you can add in your file name. I'll just name this RL_1, and then you can pick your location. Once the location is picked, the next thing you can do is just go over here to add to render queue, and it will now add it to your render queue. So there's only one last step, which is just go down here and click render all. And now you've just exported your scene. So I hope you guys really like this tutorial. I try to pack as much info in it as I could. So per usual, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. See you.